Ready? I'm glad that y'all are here. Today is the second in a 2-week series on Zionism, Christian Zionism in particular. I'm going to put him on the spot, but Charles is teaching this class for the next 2 weeks, a different subject, the Adult Forum. Have you identified your subject yet? Not yet. Yes. Eucharistic prayers and Eucharistic praying. Wonderful. I love it. Thank you. So next week we're going to be with Charles and we'll learn about Eucharistic prayers and Eucharistic praying. But today, as I said, it's our second week in a study of Christian Zionism. Let's start with prayer. This prayer is at the top of the page. It's also now at the top of the screen. Let's say this prayer out loud together. O God, whose wonderful deeds of old shine forth even to our own day, you once delivered by the power of your mighty arm your chosen people from slavery under Pharaoh to be a sign for us of the salvation of all nations by the water of baptism. Grant that all the peoples of the earth may be numbered among the offspring of Abraham and rejoice in the inheritance of Israel through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Let me remind you of the assumptions that I'm using as we do this class. First, I want to remind you that the Jewish people are not the same thing as the state of Israel. Those are different. They, of course, overlap, but you cannot assume that all Jewish people are the same as the state of Israel or vice versa. Similarly, the Palestinian people cannot be equated with Hamas, which is a particular manifestation of government in Palestine, but they're not the same thing. I also think, and this is perhaps the most important for us to keep in mind as we do our work, it is that the ancient nation of Israel, or that part that is sometimes called Judah, is not the same thing as the modern political state of Israel. We must remember that there's deep historic trauma on all sides of this conflict, and that I, and therefore we, are exploring this topic as Christians. We are not exploring this as Jews, as Palestinians, as Muslims. We are exploring this topic as Christians, and it is in particular in the relationship between Christian theology, Christian actions, Christian identity, and the Zionist movement, which again we'll say more about today, that I want to focus on. And I gave this disclaimer last week. I'm going to give it again because of the sensitive nature of our topic. And because of the many complex layers, I might cut you off. You might begin to say something that I think is out of bounds for our conversation. I'm going to say, we're not going to talk about that today. We can talk about that one-on-one, or you can find another avenue. But that's important, I think, for us to feel safe in this space and to talk about something that is so sensitive and really important. All right, last week, I'm not going to give you a full review, but last week we looked at primarily the biblical texts, the biblical stories that undergird what is called Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism, we'll see some of its origins today, but Christian Zionism is the belief among some Christians that the security and physical reconstitution of the state of Israel, the nation of Israel, the land of Israel, is tied to the second coming of Jesus. And to oversimplify it, Christian Zionists believe that when Israel is fully safe and constituted in the Middle East, the land of Canaan, the land identified as the land of promise, then Jesus will come back. So in other words, if we want Jesus to come back, and we do want Jesus to come back, that is a part of our hope, what becomes a little obscure is that a few people have begun to read the Bible in ways that say, oh, if we believe that and hope for that, then we also must hope for, believe, and support a political reality in the 20th and 21st century, which is the security of the nation of Israel, the modern-day state of Israel. And I think as Christians, it's our duty to separate those two things. That's what I want to do. I'm not the person, I did study political science in college, but trust me, I'm not the person to navigate the Middle East peace process. And we aren't either. And I think when our church, any church, begins to meddle in those ways, we step outside of what we can faithfully say. But what we can, and I think must faithfully say, is that Christians and the Christian faith now has an outsized influence on political process in Israel. And our job, I think, is to extricate Christianity from that. At least, or at least maybe a better way to say that is to be clear about what we believe about Zionism in order for Christians to begin to act independent of what I really believe is a fairly narrow and minority expression of the Christian faith. And I think Christian Zionism has made it harder for peace to take place in Israel, harder for us to respect the dignity of every human being who lives in that part of the world, harder for us to care about the urgent needs of people in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Israel. So I hope that this is clarifying. But let me pause and ask questions, comments about just the foundation of what we're doing before we dig into a little more of the more recent history of this movement. Questions, comments. I'm not an expert, but we're exploring this together. What do you think? Ray. I'm reminded before Ray speaks, my senior year of seminary, one of the professors who didn't do well with children was supposed to give a children's sermon at the closing Eucharist. And he called the children down and he said, now listen, y'all have to sit there and be quiet and pay attention. And then he started asking questions and they wouldn't respond. And he got really frustrated that they wouldn't respond. And so when I tell you, you better not say anything wrong or I'll cut you off. But what do you want to say? I recognize that I'm following in the footsteps of my erstwhile colleague. So anyway, thank you, Ray, for breaking the ice. Ray.
I just wanted to point out, I skimmed this wonderful collection of authorities you have here. I just want folks to know that when the Balfour Declaration was issued in 1917, Britain controlled Egypt and India, and also the oil of the Middle East was in issue. In about 1903, the British Navy had switched from coal to oil because oil had a higher energy density. So the original plan for Israel was partly to help Britain control its trade routes between Great Britain and India, and also secure the oil of the Middle East.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Other thoughts before we dig in? All right. How many of you have done any extensive studying of Palestinian history, whether in an academic setting, a professional setting, or just a personal curiosity? Anybody done this? One or two of us, yeah? I haven't done much. So this is I've kind of enjoyed this. And I know I'm cherry picking. This is a semester long course that we're going to do in about 30 minutes, which is to say we're not going to do it well. But I do think starting the conversation today helps us be faithful in really important conversations going forward. All right, we're not going to read everything. I've got 6 pages of handouts, which is just ridiculous. Mostly take that home. But we are going to read all of the first bit because and it's, again, selections of a document. But I'm curious, would someone pretty please read the first 3 paragraphs, which continue, the third one continues at the top, and stop before the personal diary? Who would read those? Thank you. Tammy is going to do that for us. Thank you. This is from Theodore Herschel, who's often identified as the founder of modern Zionism. Yes.
The Jewish Question, 1896. Should the powers declare themselves willing to admit our sovereignty over a neutral piece of land, then the society will enter into negotiations for the possession of this land. Here, 2 territories come into consideration: Palestine and Argentine. In both countries, important experiments in colonization have been made, though on the mistaken principle of a gradual infiltration of Jews. An infiltration is bound to end badly. It continues till the inevitable moment when the native population feels itself threatened and forces the government to stop a further influx of Jews. Immigration is consequently futile unless we have the sovereign right to continue such immigration. The Society of Jews will treat with the present masters of the land, putting itself under the protectorate of the European powers, if they prove friendly to the plan. We could offer the present possessors of the land enormous advantages, assume part of the public debt, build new roads for traffic, which our presence in the country would render necessary, and do many other things. The creation of our state would be beneficial to adjacent countries because the cultivation of a strip of land increases the value of its surrounding districts in innumerable ways. Shall we choose Palestine or Argentine? We shall take what is given us and what is selected by Jewish public opinion. Palestine is our ever memorable historic home. The very name Palestine would attract our people with a force of marvelous potency. If His Majesty the Sultan were to give us Palestine, we could in return undertake to regulate the whole finances of Turkey. We should there form a portion of a rampart of Europe against Asia, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. We should, as a neutral state, remain in contact with all Europe, which would have to guarantee our existence. The sanctuaries of Christendom would be safeguarded by assigning to them an extraterritorial status such as is well known to the law of nations. We should form a guard of honor about these sanctuaries, answering the fulfillment of this duty with our existence. Guard of honor would be the great symbol of the solution of the Jewish question after 18 centuries of Jewish suffering.
Thank you. Appreciate that. For those watching at home, I'm sorry I didn't scroll up. I was caught in my own handout. Let me say a little bit about that, and then I want you to hear. Then I want to hear from you as well. So Herschel, Jewish. It's a long document. You can read the whole thing online. Herschel is commemorated in the modern state of Israel. There's a national holiday on his birthday. His portrait hangs in the Knesset, the legislative body. He's not the only person who endeavored in this work of Zionism, but his work was really important, and it's a really lovely, long, and detailed document about what it takes to establish a Jewish state. We didn't have time to read it all, but some of the things he notes are this is not going to be a theocracy. Our priests are going to do religious stuff, and our politicians are going to do political stuff, and they are not going to be the same thing. We can't do that. This document also speaks really clearly about needing to care for the people who live in that territory already, those non-Jewish Palestinians, Arabs in particular. What do you notice? Is there anything in particular that sticks out to you before we read the next paragraph, which kind of makes everything come crashing down? Anything that you've noticed? Yeah, Bernadette. Or, no, where are we going first? Raise your hand. Ray, great, and then Bernadette.
The sanctuaries of Christendom would be safeguarded by assigning to them extraterritorial status, a guard of honor.
Yeah, so already, Christianity. Bernadette, raise your hand on the other side. Oh, you going over there first? Sorry, Haley and then Bernadette. That's what I get for thinking I know. Yes.
Are they? Is he trying to say that that the modern state of Israel could have been in Argentina?
Yes, absolutely. They weren't sure which one, and he's sort of saying, "Look, I don't know. We're either moving to Argentina or we're moving to Palestine, but we got to get somebody to give us some land and allow us to be free and allow us the chance to have immigrants come protect us, right?" And so I skipped the paragraph where he argues why Argentina would be great, because. Anyway, yes, but read it. It's really fascinating. Yeah. Bernadette.
This is loaded with a lot of things, but a couple, the phrase when he says Palestine is our ever memorable historic home, right there, that's a boom.
Yeah.
And then also it's interesting, an outpost of civilization as opposed to barbarism. We should, and they could undertake to regulate the whole finances of Turkey.
Yes, and that will become, in the Balfour Declaration, a part of, and British policy beyond that, eventually American and other Western policies. Part of it is to be a boundary for barbarism, right? That kind of that language. Like, we need a foothold of civilization in this part of the world, right? Let me sort of peel back a couple things. Our ever memorable home, yes, and yet it was possible it was going to be in Argentina, which tells us that although some of this is about the sacredness of this particular land and the promises that have been made to people, the security of Jewish people in a free and independent state was not only and necessarily tied to this particular strip of land. I think that's interesting. I think it changes the way I think about conversations. The second thing that you say as well, yes, absolutely. This already, whether it's the sites of Christendom or the security that we need from Europe or the good that we can do to our neighbors, like already, this is a politically savvy appeal. The author and those who support it know that this is only going to work if people in power make decisions like this. Yeah, Sarah. I'm going to say a little bit more about history in a minute, which is dangerous, but yeah, Sarah.
Thank you. It reminds me of a story that I learned from the Osage, where they were being pushed out of their lands, and they set out to figure out where to go, and they tried to find where the soil is the lowest quality. And the reason they said that is because they knew that the Europeans would try and come and take lands that were high in soil quality.
Yeah.
And so there's I think that there's an aspect of like what's in the earth in both of those places that was driving some of this decision.
Yes, and particularly in Argentina, the paragraph of Argentina talks about the fertility of the soil. Yeah, right, yeah. This is a Jewish author with a Jewish perspective. This is not a Christian, but Christians will borrow from this and begin to make it our own, and I say our own because I'm a Christian, make it our own agenda. Sarah, since you're right there, would you read that next paragraph from his personal diary? This was written about a year before the publication of the larger book, Personal Diary.
Okay. When we occupy the land, we must expropriate gently the private property on the estates assigned to us. We shall try to spirit the penniless population across the border by procuring employment for it in the transit countries, while denying it any employment in our country. Both the process of expropriation and the removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly.
Yes, not for public consumption. But we do the same thing, right? I mean, surely the forced removal of Native Americans from their lands, there's a lot of showy goodness about that, but behind closed doors, we're saying things about we've got to enculturate them in Western culture, right? We've got to steal their children and teach their children our Western ways so that their tribal identity and their defiance will weaken over the generations, right? But we don't say that in public. We hide that, and only generations later does it come out. So even though this is a Jewish text from a Jewish perspective, like already we know that it's messy. When you come into a land that is occupied by people and has been occupied by people for generations, centuries, maybe millennia in this case, if you want to take it from them, that's not easy. You got to find a way to do that. And if we can get Europe to support us, right, then the rest will be okay, right? So we see already, and if it sounds a lot like our own history, it is. And I'm not in any way trying to demonize or denigrate a different culture or a different political apparatus. This is our story as well, and we bought into it. Let's keep going. Who would read the Balfour Declaration for us? This short little letter from Arthur James Balfour, basically the foreign minister in the British cabinet. Who would read that for us, please? Great. Thank you, Sarah. We'll take it.
Thank you. Dear Lord Rothschild, I have much pleasure in conveying to you on behalf of His Majesty's government the following declaration of sympathy with Jewish Zionist aspirations, which has been submitted to and approved by the cabinet. His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. Yours sincerely, Arthur James Balfour.
And thus, Western powers start to align themselves with the Zionist movement, a Jewish movement for Jewish security. Later on, you'll see there are lots of different motives for the establishment of a state of Israel, some of which are Western political motives, some of which are Jewish motives and some of which are Christian Zionist motives, and they all overlap in objective, but the reasons for it are different. This document becomes the principal pattern and guide for British foreign policy and eventually other foreign policy, which begins to affect the League of Nations and then eventually the United Nations, its successor, in trying to solve the question of what do we do in Palestine, right? Here's the history bit. Before, as we saw, I think hinted at in the first reading, before World War I, Palestine was under Ottoman control, the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire falls in World War I, and this part of the world becomes British territory, right? So the Palestinian mandate, the British mandate in Palestine, it's a colony, because it's a colony of the British Crown. Other countries, Syria, Jordan, and others become colonies of other European powers, but Egypt, Suez, what we call Gaza, Israel, Palestine, and the Transjordan area, where the prophets spent a lot of their time on the other side of the Jordan, all of that's under British control. And so it is pretty soon after Britain takes control of that this document gets written. And it's going to be 31 years before Israel declares its independence, when Britain gets out of the business of mandating a government in Palestine. But for those 30 years, the policy that then leads to what follows is shaped by this document and the intention behind it. Can you begin to hear, explicitly tell the Zionists, the Jewish movement, to establish this homeland, tell them that the British government is on their side. And as long as you respect the rights of existing non-Jewish communities, we got your back, right? Of course, that becomes a difficult question. Thoughts about this, thoughts about what we're unfolding. And even though we haven't gotten to the explicitly Christian theological connection, you can already anticipate some of what it is. Because when we're talking about oil and security and resistance of barbarism, it becomes pretty hard to differentiate between what God is saying and what the ballot box is saying. So thoughts about this. It's messy. Thoughts about this. Thoughts about the Balfour Declaration. Yeah, Tammy, right up front. What's fascinating is how many times Balfour in this declaration is cited explicitly by governmental bodies. It seems like a casual letter, but this is a really big deal. Yes, Tammy.
Even though in this document it said, you'll have the support of the British government as long as nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine.
Yeah.
The Palestinian people have been betrayed since day one.
Yeah. And we'll see a little bit more as we trace that history. Yes, absolutely. And maybe it's a philosophical question for us to wrestle with, which is, can we ever count on best intentions, right? What happens when the people writing the documents all look like me? All male, all white, all European, right? That actually we convince ourselves that, that's not bad, right? That sounds really good, but how far is that going to get us, right? I mean, it's human nature. It's sin. That is sin, right? Yeah, Bernadette.
Well, it makes me question the sincerity. To me, I'm skeptical or cynical. It sounds like a CYA sentence, cover your ass. Like they just wanted it in there so they wouldn't get any.
Yeah, well, we certainly know that after the fact. Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't look at any other sources that were being written at this time that give us that sense, except all the way across the room, Sarah, except the ways in which there is, we'll see it in a little bit, there are British documents, secondary sources, that say the reason for this is not just oil and trade routes and military victory. We don't want Russian Jews coming to Britain. Mm-hmm. We don't want our culture to be watered down by people who aren't us, aren't like us. We're a Christian nation, Britain says. And so explicitly, part of this is, if we can find a place for Jewish immigrants to go that isn't where we live, wouldn't that be great, right? Right. That becomes part of why this is written. And so when we see the respecting the rights of non-Jewish communities, we recognize that maybe it's just wishful thinking, or maybe it's CYA, as you say. Yes, Sarah.
I was going to mention that it's like there's a self supporting self here as well. But the thing that reminds me of here is like not about us, without us is an expression that I learned from Arkansas United. And it's a great self-check. It's like, am I talking about him, without him?
Yeah.
And then, and that's what's happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's keep going. Fast forward 20 years, 20 years, yes. The Peel Commission, another great British report. We're not going to read the whole thing. I commend it to you. It's not, and also I've only given you a very small part of it. But would somebody read that first paragraph for us on your handout or on the screen? Who would read that bit for us, please? Thank you, Bernadette, all the way across the room. You're going to get your steps in. Raise your hand high. Thank you. Let me tell you that the Peel Commission report was in response to violence, great violence, that was affecting both Palestinian, like non-Jewish Palestinians, and also Jewish Palestinians at the time. So yes.
The underlying causes of the disturbances of 1936 were, number one, the desire of the Arabs for national independence. Number two, their hatred and fear of the establishment of the Jewish national home. These two causes were the same as those of all the previous outbreaks and have always been inextricably linked together. Of several subsidiary factors, the more important were, one, the advance of Arab nationalism outside Palestine, two, the increased immigration of Jews since 1933, three, the opportunity enjoyed by the Jews for influencing public opinion in Britain, four, Arab distrust in the sincerity of the British government, five, Arab alarm at the continued Jewish purchase of land, six, the general uncertainty as to the ultimate intentions of the mandatory power.
If you would also read the last two paragraphs, starting with the only solution.
Me?
Yep.
The Jewish national...
No, skip down to the last two paragraphs.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. I made you jump. Thank you. The
Sorry,
only
I
solution.
didn't jump. The only solution of the problem put forward by the Arab Higher Committee was the immediate establishment of all independent Arab government, which would deal with the 400,000 Jews now in Palestine as it thought fit. To that it is replied that belief in British good faith would not be strengthened anywhere in the world if the national home were now surrendered to Arab rule. Considering the attitude which both the Arab and the Jewish representatives adopted in giving evidence, the Commission think it improbable that either party will be satisfied at first sight with the proposals submitted for the adjustment of their rival claims. For partition means that neither will get all it wants. It means that the Arabs must acquiesce in the exclusion from their sovereignty of a piece of territory long occupied and once ruled by them. It means that the Jews must be content with less than the land of Israel they once ruled and have hoped to rule again. But it seems possible that on reflection, both parties will come to realize that the drawbacks of partition are outweighed by its advantages. For if it offers neither party all it wants, it offers each what it wants most, namely freedom and security.
Thank you. Increased immigration of Jewish people in 1933. Well, duh, right? Anti-Semitism is real. Anti-Semitism is a threat, has been a threat since the Jewish people were identified, right? That is something that Jewish people live with, and we cannot ignore that and should not ignore that. 1933, right? Hitler, the Third Reich coming to power. Jewish, as you can read in the rest of Herschel's writing or other writings, a Jewish security in Europe was not guaranteed, but in 1933 it becomes particularly fragile, and this has become a place where more and more people are able to buy land and are being welcomed. The population is growing. I'll show you a map in just a minute about a map of Jewish-owned territory land in this part of the world, and you'll see even early on, even in the early part of the 20th century, land is being bought by what are labeled Zionists, but those who want Jewish people to have a right of return to their ancestral homes. So the Peel report proposes a solution. which is we got to divide it. It is maybe the original two-state solution, right? And there's a lot of details around it. It becomes the background for the United Nations plan. Finally, in the 1940s, after World War II, violence continues. Arab violence, Jewish violence continues. Finally, Britain said, we don't know what to do. We need to ask the United Nations for help. So one of the first big problems the United Nations tried to tackle was the question of Palestine. And they proposed this partition plan. And I haven't given you the language of it, though you can read Resolution 181 on your own. But it sounded a little like this. Britain is no longer to be in control of the Palestinian mandate. That was always the plan. After World War I, League of Nations divided up and they classified different territories in 3 categories with the likelihood of successful home rule, self-rule, and Palestine was the top class. It was not feasible that it could function as a colony for very long. So it was always the case that Britain was going to get out of the way of a very well-educated, very well-connected, a very economically independent group of people, namely the people who lived in Palestine. So we're going to end British control of Palestine. We're going to divide it into separate, independent Jewish and Arab states. 55% of the land is going to be given to Jewish control. It also happens to be contiguous. 45% is going to be given to Arab control, and it's not contiguous. It's split up into different parts. We'll see it in the map. Jerusalem, however, is going to be independent. It's going to be governed by an international community as an independent territory to make sure that the most important sacred sites for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam will continue to be accessible by the people of those faiths, and it won't become a cause of violence. That sounds a lot like what Herschel was proposing way back at the end of the 19th century, because it is. This proposal in the United Nations is supported, as you might expect, by all the West, right? European and American nations. Cuba didn't support it, but almost every other nation west of Europe supported it, but not a single Arab nation supported it. They all voted no. There were a lot of abstentions, but all of the Arab nations in the United Nations says, no, this is crazy. Why would we sign on for this? This is not fair. This is not right. That didn't matter. It gets approved, but it's never actually implemented because on the day that the British mandate ended, May 18th, 1948, Israel was ready to declare independence. And they did so. And they didn't decide what they didn't say what their borders were. They just said we're independent. And they started fighting for the borders. The very next day, 5 Arab nations attacked Israel. And the first Arab-Israeli war took place. Eventually, armistice in 1849, the establishment of what was known as the Green Line, which is the division of Palestine that many of us are familiar with from looking at grade school maps. And at that time, 67% of the land was then under Jewish control, so more than was originally associated. And there wasn't an independent Arab state. They didn't sign on to this. They didn't have a state. They didn't want this. So Arab Palestinians said, why are you taking our land from us and establishing a state? They didn't have a nation. Israel establishes a nation. Western countries say, that's a nation. We will communicate with you as nation to nation. And as a result, 750,000 Palestinians forcibly removed from their land in what is known in the Palestinian community, the Arab community, as the Nakba, the catastrophe. That's what happens in 47 and 48 and 49, right? The seeds of kind of something really old, late 19th century, takes shape in a way that, again, if not about us without us, right? It just doesn't work that way. Let me fast forward and say, some of y'all were alive for the Six-Day War in 1967. You might remember the Six-Day War, called the Six-Day War because of its creation language, right? We're going to establish creation, a new Israel for 6 days. And on the 7th day, there will be peace. There will be rest, right? Israel attacks Egyptian airfields. War ensues with 3 Arab nations. Israel then annexes Sinai, the Gaza Strip, West Bank, the Golan Heights, and East Jerusalem, which at the time had been primarily occupied by Palestinians. 300,000 Palestinians are forcibly removed from their homes. And the entire international community refused to acknowledge any of the lands that were gained in the War of 67 until the United States agreed to do so in 2017. You might remember that was a big deal. That was a big deal, but we kind of didn't notice. The capital was recognized capital was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And as a result, many of the gains that had been achieved in 67 through the war had become enshrined, though we'll backtrack a little bit in the more recent developments. Let me pause for a minute. Questions, comments about that so far? We haven't talked a lot about the theology yet, but you can see where it is. It's right below the surface. Questions or comments? Yeah. Yeah, Ray. One of the other challenges is that we don't talk about this in schools. Because if you work at the University of Arkansas, you're not allowed to talk about either Gaza or, I can't remember, the West Bank. I think the West Bank, the phrase the West Bank. You're not allowed to talk or write about the West Bank in your classes. That's a rule, because we don't want to talk about that. Where do you think that rule came from, right? And how is that rule becoming promoted, right? Because of Christians, because of us. Yeah, Ray.
I remember a photograph from 1967 of a Jewish soldier with an American helmet and American equipment with netting on his helmet, with this look of awe on his face. Now they have Jerusalem for the first time since the Romans destroyed the temple, 1900 years earlier.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I think it was a signal event.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Other thoughts about what we've studied so far, what we've talked about so far? Yeah. All right, more recent developments. These are the parts that I can remember. Right, Egypt became the first Arab country to recognize the nation of Israel in 1979. That was a really big deal, and it took 3 years for Israel to withdraw from Sinai. Right, they've kept Gaza, control of Gaza, though it's Palestinian, but if you went to school between 67 and 82, the Sinai was under Israeli control, only became under Egyptian control after that agreement. Jordan eventually becomes the second country to recognize that, and the northern border gets secured. Right? Again, at some point, Arab countries begin to recognize the nation of Israel as a state in order to just provide for their own security, their own reasonable economic and political security. I remember the Oslo Accords. I remember them being a really big deal when Yasser Arafat, right, sat down with the Israeli president, right? And they assigned these accords, and that helps us begin to divide some of the land that had been seized in the 67 war in order for some of it to be back under Palestinian control. In particular, the West Bank, all of that area west of the Jordan River, is divided into sections under Israeli, Palestinian, and joint control. But although those accords said that we're going to stop having Jewish-only settlements in that area, that effort has continued. It is politically popular in Israel, and so continued forced removal of Palestinians from the West Bank area has led to the functional breakdown of the Oslo Accords. And then, of course, you might remember there was a blockade on Gaza by the Israeli military, supported by other Western powers. After Hamas came to power, Hamas, political entity, part of whose constitution is the destruction of Israel, the preservation of Palestinian identity and the destruction of Israel are related topics that are that overlap considerably. So the blockade happens, and so much of our history in the last 20 years has been in response to that, including, of course, the Gaza war, which came after the attacks of Hamas on October the 7th. The most recent data that I could find before today is that we estimate that over 69,000 Palestinians, including almost 19,000 children, and almost 2,000 Israelis, including 36 children, have been killed because of violence in the Gaza war, not to mention those who are dying because of starvation, famine, or lack of medical care, or just the trauma that lingers after war like this. So that's where we've been. Let me show you a map. At least I think I'll show you a map. Yeah, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to have to scroll back and forth. Oh, not like that. All right, so I know it's faded, but I wanted to get all four of these. So the one on your left is 1918, and the blue is Palestinian Arab settlements. The black is Jewish settlements. 1918, 1947, which is right before the United Nations issues their declaration. You can see that in those 30 years, Jewish settlements have increased. Then after 1947 and before the 1967 war, You can see, having displaced 750,000 Palestinians, right? The Palestinians are now, again, in the blue section. Israel lives and controls the black sections. And then more recently in 2017, you can see that that shrinks again. The West Bank is this large blue section right in the middle, right? And you can see that it's being displaced continually, right? So just kind of see that, and imagine. So how did that happen, right? Whose votes, whose voice, what theology has been used to support that, right? Yeah, let me pause. Questions, comments, thoughts? Yeah, Claudia. Wait for the microphone so that the people at home can hear you especially. They will want to hear you. Thank you.
One time I heard a Baptist teacher teaching the Bible saying that in order for Christ to come back again, there were like 3 main prophecies that have to be in place. One already took place when Israel became a state in 1948. Then the second one was the rebuild of the temple, where now is the, what's the name of this beautiful mosque?
The Dome of the Rock?
Yes, on that place.
Yes.
And the third one is the rise of the Antichrist.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's right. And I'll tell you, like, I did not grow up in a family that identified as Christian Zionist, but I grew up learning that. Like, it just gets blurry. Like, not because my parents taught me that, but just I lived in a Protestant Christian culture that was largely shaped by evangelicalism in a way that I kind of grew up thinking that, yeah, like, I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know when it's going to happen, but the temple's going to be rebuilt. The state of Israel is going to be secure. Antichrist is going to come, and then Jesus comes back. So let's look forward to that, right? And all of a sudden, I couldn't separate theological beliefs from political actions. And of course, they inform each other. They're supposed to inform each other. But we need to be able to have a real conversation about what theology are we actually saying? Is that what we believe? Yeah, Mark in the back.
So what I'm confused about is I read something about with the Christian nationalists is the reason they wanted the formation, as previously mentioned, is because they want to actually convert the Jews into Christians and then totally take over, the whole idea, the whole story comes together because now where they want Christ to come back is Christian. So it's confusing to me.
Yeah, Christian Zionists. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's part of it. The expectation, the language is not clear. You have to kind of listen to sermons and read teachings. But yes, the expectation is that the Jews who are not killed in the great catastrophes described in Revelation will convert. Yeah, that's the expectation. It's not faithful to Judaism or Christianity, right? But it's a marriage of power. It's become a marriage of power. Yeah. Yeah.
It just really resonated with me when you said the culture that I was raised in. I just wanted to say that my children go to an elementary school that really celebrates culture, and we have a huge cultural month. And up until 2023, we would have different booths for our cultural night, and there was a Palestine booth and an Israel booth, two booths down from one another. And there were some adults that kind of, gave a side eye of, how's this working out? And they had maps, and the maps were different. And the people who were not fazed by that were the children. We were kind of like, how does this all work? We just let it roll, and we can't do that anymore. And that because of the war, but I just think about how we aren't teaching these things in this historical context, and so and we're not looking at history, and we are living history in our current events right now, and we can just learn from it. So I would just appreciate the conversation, and I just think that it was our kids that were like, oh, that doesn't match exactly.
Yeah.
I can handle that in a way that the adults, I think in a more calcified way, could not handle that information.
Yeah.
Or we're kind of like, how's this, this doesn't match in a way that kids could take in.
Yeah, thank you. I love that. That's my experience. Thank you. All right, we're not going to read all of this, but this is where Christianity gets involved, right? This is a small group. It's a small group, but some of this sounds really familiar, right? The Third International Christian Zionist Congress. Like statements like number 1, the Bible is the inspired word of God, basis of our faith, following the teachings of the Lord as apostles, source of our motivation as Zionists. There's nothing wrong with that. We should all cherish the Bible as God's word, right? Section 2, God the Father Almighty chose the ancient nation of people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, to reveal his plan of redemption for the world. They remain elect of God, and without the Jewish nation, God's redemptive purposes for the world will not be completed. Amen. Preach it. That is wonderful. But notice, verse 4, yes, of course, we want to claim that generations of Jewish people have been killed and persecuted, and we challenge the church to repent. Absolutely. By the time we get to 5, we start to mix things that I think, the scattering of the Jewish people throughout the centuries of the diaspora was ordained by the Lord as corrective, as were previous exiles, and redemptive, bringing the knowledge of the one true God of Israel unto the Gentile nations. Maybe if I were Jewish, I would feel comfortable saying that about the history of my people. I'm not sure that I feel comfortable as a Christian defining the purpose of disaster that other people have experienced, but then we get really muddy in number 6, the modern ingathering of the Jewish people to Eretz Israel, the land of Israel, and the rebirth of the nation of Israel are in fulfillment of biblical prophecies. Whoa, now wait a minute. Who decides that? Who decides that political realities today are the fulfillment of Old and New Testament biblical prophecies? As soon as we start to say that, we don't have a choice. It's clear where our votes and our money and our effort should be, because now we've said this is what God expects. As you continue to read, we won't read them all, but as you continue to read number 8, the Lord in his zealous love for Israel and the Jewish people blesses and curses people and judges nations based on their treatment of the chosen people of Israel. That's one way to read the text that we read last week from Genesis 12. But I'm not sure that's a fair way to read it. I'm not sure it should be a guide for our policy, right? So then we see in number 11, the Jewish people and the Jewish state get mixed up. And I want to suggest that we can't mix those up. We should be clear about protecting Jewish people, right, for self-determination. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the Jewish state is the same thing as Jewish people. The last thing I want to say, because I'm out of time, they're going to start without me. Like I referred to this earlier. They will, which is scary because I'm the preacher. But Sandra Kiersmott, great theologian, she talks a lot about so what are the motivations that we see? From the West, part of the motivation for the establishment of the modern-day state of Israel is to appease Western guilt after the Holocaust. It's also to honor the anti-Semitic desire to keep Jews out of their countries. It's also to establish a military presence in the Middle East and to protect those trade routes. Like, we don't talk about that, but that's a lot of it. That's a part of it. That's the reason Britain and the United States care about the state of Israel. It's in our interest politically. That doesn't mean it's in our interest theologically. For the Jewish people, of course, it is to provide a place of safety in the wake of constant anti-Semitism around the world. We can't lose sight of that. We can't lose sight of that. Manchester, this week, right? A people who are Jewish, who gather as Jewish people, are under threat. That is real. But so are the people who live in Palestine who are not Jewish. But we don't hear about them or talk about them because of the political alignment between a narrow Christian theology and public policy. And as we've heard, for Christian Zionists, it's to hasten the return of the Messiah and the inauguration of the millennial age. The last thing you're going to have to read on your own is a letter from our presiding bishop, Sean Rowe, that he wrote a few months ago about the crisis in Gaza, saying what can we do and what we cannot do. Some of the things that he calls for are political, but I think he does a really good job of separating out the theology from the politics and how our theology informs our political activism, but in ways that we can claim and be honest and transparent about. Thank you all so much. Next week, Charles is going to lead a class on the theology of Eucharist and praying Eucharistically. Thank you all so much.